Maxey from outside. Sixers lead, courtesy of Tyrese Maxey.
Hit deep to left field, going back is Locastro. It is gone!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast here on Pick Swap Media. Ryan Coyle, as always, leading you through today's show. We roll on with our 2025 college football preview series, and today we're headed to the Big Ten. Last year's Big Ten champion, first year in the conference, the Oregon Ducks. They check in at number 7 in this year's AP Top 25 to start off the season. And as always, with every episode we do, we hit on the head coach, we hit on the 2024 recap, offense, defense, and then we'll run through the schedule prediction and give you some potential plays here on the over-under, the national championship, to win the Big Ten, to make the playoff. We'll talk about all that and more in under 15 minutes right here on this episode regarding the Oregon Ducks. But if you haven't already, check out some of our other episodes. We've touched on another Big Ten team in Michigan. We've touched on Texas Tech. We've touched on Arizona State, Kansas State, Clemson, South Carolina, Oklahoma. We're hitting on all the big dogs as we head into this season. Going to be rolling out these episodes daily over the next 2 weeks as we line up ahead of this week 1 stretch coming up. But we even got football this week. We got week 0, a great matchup with Kansas State now, and Iowa State. There'll also be a pretty solid matchup, I think, Fresno State and Kansas. We'll get a look at Stanford, maybe the worst team in the ACC, the Power 4 this year, playing Hawaii. They're an underdog in that matchup. So a little nice appetizer this weekend before we get into the heavy hitters next week. But we'll start it off with today's episode, breaking down the head coach of the Oregon Ducks, and that is one Dan Lanning, the head coach since 2022, entering year 4 at Oregon. Has a pretty nice, I would say, pretty good record here in his first 4 years as a head coach, or entering year 4 with a 35-6 overall record. Dan Lanning led this Oregon Ducks team to a 13-1 record last season, 9-0 in the Big Ten. Beat Penn State in the Big Ten title game for their first ever Big Ten title, but they lose to Ohio State 41-21 in their first playoff game. He's regarded, though, Dan Lanning, as one of the best young coaches in the sport. I think if you made someone draft or had their pick, if they were building a program from the ground up, age considered and everything, Dan Lanning might be that guy at only 39 years old. He turned down Alabama a few years ago when that job opened up. So it sounds like he's going to be at Oregon for the long term. They have all the resources. They have all the money up there, thanks to Phil Knight and Nike. It's a situation where you have to figure he's probably the next Nick Saban or Dabo Swinney, a long-term coach at this program, unless he wants to make that jump to the NFL. He's 39. He's got plenty of time to stay in Oregon. He's got plenty of time to go to the NFL, come back to college if it doesn't work out. He's in a great situation going forward, but this is one of the brightest young coaches in the country. You know, he gets his feet wet in the playoff last year, a disappointing result to Ohio State after such a great season, but future's bright for this guy as he's only 39 years old. When we recap the 2024 season for the Oregon Ducks, 13-1 on the year, as we just touched on, 9-0 in the Big Ten, and they beat Penn State in that Big Ten title game 45-37, a pretty entertaining ball game there. Enter the college football playoff as a 1 seed, but they played an Ohio State team that was out for blood. You know, that Ohio State team had that embarrassing loss to Michigan. They had the pretty crazy loss to Oregon, 32-31 in the regular season, where Will Howard slid and time ran out. And then they go into that first playoff game against Tennessee and absolutely blow the doors off them. And it seemed like they were all kind of off to the races from there. Like they were running into a machine. Oregon was, and Oregon was playing off a lot of rest. They hadn't played in nearly a month, I believe it was, 2 or 3 weeks about, since their Big Ten title game win over Penn State. Ohio State was more kind of, ready. The rust was off, and Ohio State got up 21-0 before you could really even blink. They won that game 41-21 over Oregon. And, that's a disappointing end to the season after going 13-1, 13-0 during the regular season in the Big Ten title game. To lose by 20 points in your first playoff game was a pretty disappointing end to the season. But they had 9 wins by double figures throughout the season. They only beat 3 ranked teams. When you look at their schedule, they're like, oh, who did they really kind of beat? But they had 8 games over 35 points last year. Dylan Gabriel led that offense to a pretty historic season. But first year in the Big Ten, I think that was a really successful year. Say what you want about the shortcomings in the playoff. Ohio State going into the year was viewed as the favorite. It was viewed as the team to kind of win it all for this college football season last year, and they didn't really put it together until the playoffs, where they really kind of were playing with their hair lit on fire, and they run into this Oregon team and they blow them out of the water. I'd say that Ohio State was still the more talented team last year, and that's still a great season for Oregon, especially your first year in the Big Ten. But now the bar has been raised. The expectations have to be for Oregon each and every year to compete for that Big Ten title, compete for national championships. I think Dan Lanning knows that. I think everyone in that program knows it. But there's no excuse for them not to be right up there at the top with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State each and every year. That has to be the expectations for Oregon now in the Big Ten. When we transition over and look at the offense and the defense from this year, we'll start with the offense. Offense under Dan Lanning at Oregon has been a quarterback factory these past 2 years with Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel. We saw both those guys kind of, Dylan Gabriel wasn't really looked as an NFL prospect, I think, going into last year, but he has a great year last year. He becomes one of the better passers in college football history and becomes a mid-round draft pick with the Browns. And we saw Bo Nix really rewrites his career at Oregon as well under Dan Lanning. And then he goes last year as a really good rookie year with the Broncos and takes them to the playoffs. If you would have said that 2 years ago to anybody, they would have said, hell no. Like Bo Nix, maybe a fifth or sixth pick at best, fun preseason watch, maybe has a cup of coffee there in the NFL, but no one viewed him as an NFL quarterback. Credit to Dan Lanning for getting his career back on track, and now they turn to a new quarterback in Dante Moore. Can he be the next successful quarterback under Dan Lanning? Remains to be seen. But a former highly touted recruit out of UCLA went to UCLA, originally transferred to Oregon last year, and he takes a seat behind Dylan Gabriel, kind of sits there, learns the system, and now he has the chance to be the guy. They return 8 starters from that offense last year, but they also lose their leading receiver in Tez Johnson. Evan Stewart, another big-time transfer from the past few years, also out for the season, likely with a knee injury. So they do need some people to step up. Some young guys are going to be counted on. A young quarterback's going to be counted on. That's why I'm a little hesitant to be kind of all in on this Oregon team. The talent is certainly there, but you're ushering in a new quarterback with Dante Moore. You have some new young pass catchers. The last few years, Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel, those are as two of experienced quarterbacks as you'll find in all of college football. You got a young quarterback in there now. You got young pass catchers. It might take some time for this team to fully gel, but by the end of the season, by the playoff time, they might be kind of hitting their stride and ready to make a run for the national championship this year. But when you look at some of these young pass catchers that we're talking about, return tight end Kenyon Sadiq, regarded as one of, if not the best tight ends in the country, and they're bringing to Coyle Moore as well, arguably the best receiver in this past recruiting class. So Dante Moore is going to have 2 really explosive players at these positions, 2 guys that you can count on. Can Coyle Moore have a Jeremiah Smith type impact? I don't think so necessarily from day one, but I do expect him to be able to put up some really strong numbers this year. And Kenyon Sadiq, I expect to be kind of that safety blanket and the go-to receiver on some key downs. But most notably, I think the biggest addition to this Oregon offense this offseason, Mekhi Hughes out of Tulane, one of the best running backs in the portal this past year, maybe even the best. He's a stud. It reminds a lot of people of the former Oregon running back Bucky Irving. I think he's in for a big year and a big career here at Oregon going forward. The line should be one of the best in the Big Ten. He should have plenty of rushing lanes to go through. And with these guys and these weapons on the outside, it should be a really balanced out. It should be really fun. We said last year, I think they put up 35 or more in 8 different games. I think those numbers could be kind of up there towards the end of the season. They get kind of lucky at the beginning of the year with some of their matchups, with being Montana State, Oklahoma State, Northwestern, Oregon State, like not exactly murderer's row there to start, but once they get into Big Ten play, they should be able to be hitting their stride. But this should be a really fun and exciting offense this year if Dante Moore can kind of fill those shoes of Dylan Gabriel and Bo Nix as we head into the season. We look to the defense now. The defense returned 6 starters from last year's group that only allowed 19.4 points per game. Mateo Yu, not even going to attempt to say his last name, but DJ Yu, younger brother, is the headliner on this defense. One of the best pass rushers in the entire country. He returns after having 9.5 sacks last season. He is expected to be a first-round pick coming up in the NFL draft. So look for him, Mateo Yu, to be one of the better pass rushers and the leader of this defense. Another name college football fans are probably familiar with, Bear Alexander. He was a big-time recruit. He's been a big-time player at moments, but has also been, a bit of a locker room problem, has had some issues with some programs. But he's been at USC and Georgia. He's on this D-line as well. Will he be a key force? What kind of Bear Alexander shows up week in and week out might determine how good that defense really is up front on the line of scrimmage. They return their leading tackler as well at the linebacker spot with Bryce Botcher, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He'll lead the defense. He'll be one of the top linebackers in the Big Ten. Just your typical sideline to sideline linebacker, going to have 100 tackles, going to be out there for every single snap. He's kind of the voice and the heart of that defense. The secondary, they got lit up in that Rose Bowl game last year. If you remember watching that game, it was like Jeremiah Smith and those Ohio State receivers were just running free from the start. They get up 21-0 before you even know it, and I think you can kind of blame that on the secondary. The offense didn't come out strong, didn't start out hot either, but that secondary was getting lit up. Can they get better this year, and can they improve? I think determines how good this defense is. When you look at Oregon's defense, so I think, as I talked about at the beginning, they kind of struggled against some of these top teams. They didn't really beat that many high-quality opponents. The high-quality opponents that they played last year, the playoff teams that Oregon played last year, they gave up Ohio State 41 points and 31 points in the two matchups against them. Boise State, they gave up 34 points to, and Penn State, they gave up 37 points to. Drew Aller had arguably his best passing game of his entire Penn State career in that Big Ten title game. So how good can the secondary be? Can they improve? I think is really going to determine the ceiling of this team in my eyes. It's something I think you really got to watch out for in the early part of the season, if that's a group that's going to be consistently good enough to help Oregon compete for the Big Ten title. All right, when we look at the schedule prediction now for this Oregon team, a high over-under, I think right up there with like Ohio State. I think Penn State might have this too. A few of these Big Ten teams, but their over-unders coming in at 10.5, just about as high as you can get there. Over at plus 135 and under at minus 160. They are 12-1 to win the national championship, plus 320 to win the Big Ten, which is third. They are minus 220 to make the playoff and plus 175 to miss it. I think even if they go under this 10.5, they go 10-2. I think they should still feel pretty good making the playoff coming here out of the Big Ten. I think they start out 4-0. You got Montana State and Oklahoma State at home. I think there should be two pretty easy wins. At Northwestern should be a relatively easy win as well. Oregon State, I think Oregon State could surprise this year. Malik Murphy at quarterback, I could see them being like 8-4, 9-3, but Oregon gets them at home. I like Oregon to get that one done. Do like how they still have that rivalry game going now. Then they go to Penn State, one of the big games of the entire regular season. At Penn State, whiteout games on September 27th. I'm going to give Penn State the win there. First big win in a while for James Franklin, under against another potential top 5 team. I would assume Oregon to be in that mix. They might not be top 5. They might be 6 or 7. They come into the season at number 7, but I do like Penn State to get that one. First Indiana, not going to be an easy one, but I will give them a win there because they're home. At Rutgers should be a win, but those cross-country trips are always a little tricky. Versus Wisconsin should be a win. At Iowa, tricky one, tough one, but I will give them a win there as well. Versus USC a win, versus Minnesota a win. I think the USC game could be tough. I'm a little higher on USC than others. But here's my surprise pick. One of my surprise picks of the entire season. I like Washington to be an 8-4, 9-3 team this year. I like them to knock off Oregon in the last game of the regular season here. Washington, young quarterback in Damon Williams. I think Jed Fish has proven that he knows how to build a college football program now. See what he did at Arizona and what he did from going from year 1 to year 2. I think Washington's going to surprise some people, and I think Washington pulls off an upset here, and Oregon falls to 10-2. So I still like Oregon to make the playoff in that regard, but I think you lose that game, you lose 2 Big Ten games, you're most likely not going to the title. But I do think that's still good enough to probably find your way to the playoff. Minus 220 to make it. I don't know if you really want to pay that juice. Over 10.5, I definitely wouldn't touch because I think there's too many coin flip games, whether it's Penn State, whether Iowa's tricky, whether it's USC, whether it's at Washington. You do avoid Ohio State. You do avoid Michigan. So you really only got one of those big dogs in the conference in Penn State. But a few tough games at Iowa, and then, as I said, versus USC, I think it's going to be tough, and at Washington. I could see them losing any of those games potentially. Young quarterback, not that experienced. You don't really know what to expect. Young pass catchers, a lot of questions still with this Oregon team, but if they do reach their heights, they could be kind of like Ohio State come playoff time last year where they play their best ball down the stretch. So still expecting a pretty big year here from Oregon, 10-2. I expect them to go to the playoff, but not a team that I'm going to be looking to bet on in any of these preseason future markets. That'll do it for the Oregon Ducks preview. As always, everyone, thank you for tuning in. We'll have a few more of these episodes coming out on some of these big dogs, playoff expected teams over the next 10 days or so as we gear up for week 1 of college football. But week 0 is here. We're right around the corner from some actual games on our TV. But as always, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Please like, please subscribe, and we'll be talking to you next time here on Pick Swap Media.